The town of Hollowell crouched beneath a sky that never cleared, a gray shroud of fog clinging to its crooked rooftops and skeletal trees. It was the kind of place where stories festered, tales of miners lost in the old quarry, of voices carried on the wind, of curses etched into the earth. Clara Henshaw didn't believe in curses. She believed in hard work, in calloused hands, in the stubborn will to keep going when everything else fell apart. Most of all, she believed in her son, Jamie. Clara was 42, though the lines on her face made her look older, lines carved by years of raising Jamie alone after his father walked out. She was wiry and strong, her dark hair streaked with gray, always pulled back in a practical braid. Her hands bore the scars of a seamstress who'd stitched her life back together one thread at a time. Jamie, at 12, was her mirror in some ways. Same sharp green eyes, same quiet determination. But where Clara was grounded, he was a dreamer. He'd inherited his father's curiosity, always poking around abandoned barns or sketching the rusted machinery that littered Hollowell's edges. Clara didn't mind. It kept him out of trouble, and God knew she needed that peace. That Saturday morning, the air was thick with damp, the kind that seeped into your bones. Clara stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes from breakfast, 2 chipped plates, 2 mugs of weak tea. Jamie burst through the back door, his sneakers muddy, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mom, you gotta see this," he said, waving a crumpled map he'd drawn himself. "I found something at the quarry. There's a tunnel entrance I've never seen before. It's hidden behind some rocks, but I swear it's there." Clara turned, drying her hands on a rag. "The quarry? Jamie, you know I don't like you going out there. It's not safe." "It's fine, Mom. I'm careful. Please, just this once. We can go together." His eyes sparkled with that pleading look she could never resist, the one that reminded her of the little boy who'd once asked for bedtime stories about brave explorers. She sighed, glancing out the window at the fog rolling in thicker. The quarry sat on the town's western edge, a gaping scar left from Hollowell's mining days, abandoned decades ago after a collapse killed half the crew. The townsfolk avoided it, whispering about restless spirits trapped below. Clara didn't buy the ghost stories, but she knew the ground was unstable. Still, Jamie's grin was a rare light in their gray world, and she couldn't bring herself to dim it. "All right," she said, tossing the rag onto the counter. "But we're quick about it. In and out. And you stay close." Jamie hooped, darting to grab his backpack. Clara pulled on her coat, a threadbare thing she'd patched too many times, and followed him out into the mist. The walk to the quarry took 20 minutes, the fog muffling their footsteps on the gravel path. Jamie chattered the whole way, about the miners, the machines, the secrets he was sure the quarry hid. Clara half listened, her eyes scanning the horizon, her gut tightening with every step. When they reached the edge, the pit yawned before them, a jagged bowl of broken stone and twisted metal. The air smelled of wet earth and something sharper, like rust or blood. "There." Jamie pointed to a cluster of boulders near the northern rim. "Behind those. I saw it yesterday." Clara squinted, following his finger. The rocks looked ordinary, but Jamie was already scrambling down the slope, nimble as a goat. She cursed under her breath and went after him, her boots slipping on loose shale. By the time she caught up, he was prying at a slab of stone with a stick, revealing a narrow gap just wide enough for a child, or a determined woman, to squeeze through. "See," Jamie said, breathless. "It's a tunnel. I knew it." Clara crouched, peering into the darkness. A faint draft brushed her face, carrying the musty scent of decay. "Jamie, this doesn't look right. We should." The ground shuddered. It was subtle at first, a tremor she might have mistaken for her own heartbeat. Then the earth groaned, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated up her spine. Jamie's eyes widened, and before Clara could grab him, the slab he'd moved shifted. Rocks tumbled, a deafening roar filled the air, and the ground beneath them gave way. "Jamie!" Clara lunged, her fingers closing around his wrist as they fell. Dust choked her lungs, stones battered her body, and then, darkness. When she came to, pain was her world. Her head throbbed, her left arm screamed when she tried to move it. She blinked, coughing, tasting blood. The air was thick with grit, and the silence was worse than the noise had been. She groped blindly, panic clawing her chest. "Jamie!" Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Jamie!" A soft groan answered her. She crawled toward it, ignoring the agony in her arm, until her hands found him, warm, alive, curled against a jagged wall of stone. "Mom," he mumbled, his voice small. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." She pulled him close, his head against her chest, her fingers brushing dirt from his face. His breathing was shallow, but he was whole. She kissed his forehead, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. They were trapped. The tunnel had collapsed, sealing them in a pocket of earth and rock. Above, she could hear nothing. No voices, no wind, just the weight of the world pressing down. She clutched Jamie tighter, her mind racing. They'd find a way out. They had to. Outside, Hollowell mourned. The collapse was reported by a farmer who'd seen the dust cloud. Search parties scoured the quarry, but the fog and shifting debris made it impossible. After 2 days, the sheriff called it off. "They're gone," he said, voice heavy. No one could survive that. A memorial followed, quick and somber. An empty coffin, draped in white flowers, was buried in the town cemetery, a symbol of Clara and Jamie, lost forever. The townsfolk wept, whispered prayers, and turned away, unaware of the faint, desperate cries still echoing beneath the earth. Clara didn't know about the coffin. She didn't know the town had given up. All she knew was Jamie's heartbeat against her own, and the promise she whispered into the dark. "I'll get us out. I swear it." But the dark whispered back. The air in the pocket was stale, heavy with dust and the sour tang of fear. Clara's chest ached with every breath, her ribs bruised from the fall, but she forced herself to stay calm. Jamie trembled in her arms, his small frame pressed against her, as if she could shield him from the suffocating truth. They were buried alive. The faint light that had filtered through the rubble during the collapse was gone now, swallowed by a blackness so complete it felt alive, pressing against her skin like damp velvet. "Mom." Jamie's voice was a thread, fragile and fraying. Are we gonna die?" "No," Clara said, too fast, too sharp. She softened her tone, brushing a hand through his matted hair. "No, baby. We're gonna be fine. Someone's coming for us. They'll hear us. We just have to hold on." She didn't believe it. The silence above was a tombstone, sealing their fate. She'd screamed until her throat bled, pounded the rocks until her knuckles split, but the only answer was the echo of her own desperation. Still, she lied for him. She'd always lied for him. When the landlord came knocking, when the pantry was bare, when his father's absence carved a hole in his heart. She'd stitched their life together with half-truths and stubborn love, and she wouldn't stop now. Jamie shifted, wincing as he moved. "My leg hurts," he whispered. "I think it's stuck." Clara's heart lurched. She ran her hands down his body, careful but urgent, until she felt the jagged edge of a rock pinning his calf. Blood slicked her fingers, warm and sticky, and she bit back a sob. "It's okay," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I'll get it off. Just stay still." She clawed at the stone, her nails tearing, her broken arm screaming in protest. The rock budged, then lifted, and Jamie whimpered as she freed him. She tore a strip from her sleeve, wrapping it tight around his leg to staunch the bleeding. "There," she said, kissing his forehead. "Good as new." He managed a weak smile, but his eyes were glassy, his skin clammy. Shock, she thought, or blood loss. She had to keep him awake, keep him fighting. "Talk to me, Jamie. Tell me about that tunnel you found. What did you think was in there?" His voice was faint, but he latched onto the distraction. "I don't know, maybe treasure. Or old mining stuff. Like in those stories you used to read me, about pirates and caves." "Pirates, huh?" Clara forced a chuckle, though it sounded like a sob. "Maybe we'll find a chest of gold down here. Then we'll buy that little house by the river you always talk about. With a porch," he murmured. "And a dog. Yeah, a big, goofy one that'll chew up all your socks." He laughed, a small, broken sound, and Clara clung to it like a lifeline. She shifted, groping the darkness for anything. Tools, a crack in the wall, a miracle. Her fingers brushed something cold and hard, not stone but metal. She pulled it free, a rusted box no bigger than a book, its edges sharp against her palms. "What's that?" Jamie asked, peering over her shoulder. "Dunno." Clara turned it over, feeling a latch. It popped open with a groan, spilling its contents into her lap. A folded paper and something small, glinting faintly even in the dark. She squinted, her hands trembling as she unfolded the paper. It was a map, crude and faded, marked with lines and symbols she couldn't decipher. The glinting object was a locket, tarnished but intact, its clasp stuck shut. A map. Jamie's voice perked up, a spark of his old curiosity breaking through. Mom, maybe it's a way out. Clara traced the lines with her finger, her pulse quickening. The map seemed to sketch the quarry's tunnels, and one jagged path led upward, toward what might be an old shaft. Hope flickered, fragile but real. You might be right, she said. We'll follow it. But first, you rest a minute. I'll figure out where we are. She tucked the map into her coat, clutching the locket as if it could anchor her. Jamie nodded, leaning back against the rock, his breathing shallow but steady. Clara scanned their prison, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The walls were uneven, pocked with cracks, and the ceiling sagged ominously. They didn't have much time. The air was thinning, and the rocks could shift again. Then she heard it. A whisper, low and guttural, like wind through a broken pipe. It came from nowhere and everywhere, curling around her ears. She froze, her breath catching. Jamie, did you? Mom. His voice was small, terrified. I heard it too. Clara's skin prickled. She pulled him closer, her arm a shield. It's nothing, she said, though her voice shook. Just the air moving. Old tunnels do that. But it wasn't nothing. The whisper grew, forming a word. Jamie, drawn out and mournful, like a plea from the deep. Jamie whimpered, burrowing into her side. It knows my name, he said, his teeth chattering. No, it doesn't, Clara snapped, louder than she meant. It's in your head. We're tired, that's all. Focus on me, okay? On the map. We're getting out. She didn't dare admit she'd heard it too, clear as a bell. Her mind raced, grasping for logic. Air currents, echoes, anything but the impossible. Hollowell's ghost stories flashed through her head, tales she'd dismissed as nonsense. Miners trapped forever, calling from the dark. She shook it off, gripping the locket tighter. It was cold, colder than it should have been, and for a moment, she thought she felt it pulse. Mom, Jamie whispered, I'm scared. I know. She pressed her forehead to his, her voice steady despite the terror clawing her insides. But I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you. We're together, and that's enough. She didn't say the rest, that she'd failed him, that she'd let him come here, that this was her fault. Guilt gnawed at her, sharper than the pain in her arm. She'd promised to protect him, and now they were entombed, with whispers in the dark and a map that might lead nowhere. But she'd fight. For Jamie, she'd claw through hell itself. Above them, the town slept, oblivious. The coffin lay silent in its grave, flowers wilting in the fog. And below, the whispers waited. The fog clung to Hollowell like a mourner's veil, softening the edges of the cemetery where the townsfolk gathered. It was Monday, 3 days since the quarry swallowed Clara and Jamie, and the air was thick with grief and resignation. The search had ended, the sheriff's men pulling back with bowed heads and empty hands. Too dangerous, they'd said, their voices hollow. No one could have survived. So the town turned to ritual, to the comfort of closure, even if it was a lie. The coffin rested on a wooden stand, simple pine draped in white lilies that drooped in the damp. It was empty, a symbol of loss rather than a vessel for bodies, but the weight of it pressed on every chest. Reverend Polk stood at its head, his Bible trembling in his hands as he read Psalm 23, his voice cracking on the valley of the shadow of death. The crowd was small. Clara hadn't been one for friends, but those who came wept openly, their sobs mingling with the rustle of leaves. Margaret Henshaw stood apart, her coat too thin for the chill, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Clara's older sister by 5 years, she was a ghost of a woman, tall, gaunt, her blonde hair dulled by time and regret. She hadn't spoken to Clara in a decade, not since their fight over their mother's will, not since Margaret called her a stubborn fool and stormed out of her life. Now Clara was gone, and Jamie with her, and Margaret felt the silence like a knife. She should have been there. She should have said something, anything, before it was too late. The coffin lowered into the earth, ropes creaking as the gravediggers worked. A faint tremor rippled through the ground, so slight it might have been a shiver, and Margaret's breath caught. She glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice, too lost in their tears or their prayers. Dirt fell in clumps, thudding against the wood, and the sound echoed in her skull. She wanted to scream, to claw at the earth, to drag Clara back and beg forgiveness. Instead, she stood frozen, the lilies blurring through unshed tears. Reverend Polk closed his Bible. Ashes to ashes, he murmured, and the crowd dispersed, leaving the grave to the fog and the silence. Margaret lingered, staring at the fresh mound, the flowers stark against the dark soil. "I'm sorry," she whispered, too late, too quiet. The wind swallowed it. Below, in the belly of the quarry, Clara didn't know about the funeral. She didn't know her name was carved on a headstone, that the world had buried her. All she knew was the map in her hands, the locket dangling from her neck, and the boy slumped against her side. Jamie's breathing was ragged, his legs swollen beneath the makeshift bandage, but he clung to consciousness, his trust in her a fragile thread holding them both together. "We're close," Clara said, tracing the map with a blood-streaked finger. The paper was brittle, its ink smudged, but she'd pieced it together, a tunnel snaking upward, ending at what looked like a shaft. "See this? It's an old exit. Miners used it to haul ore. If we can get there, we're out." Jamie nodded, his eyes half closed. "You sure?" "Sure as I can be." She forced a smile, though her throat burned with doubt. The map was a lifeline, but the tunnel it pointed to was blocked by a wall of debris, rocks and splintered beams from the collapse. She'd been digging for hours, her hands raw, her broken arm throbbing with every move. The whispers hadn't returned, but the silence was worse, heavy with menace, as if the dark was watching. "Mom," Jamie said suddenly, his voice small. "I saw something." Clara froze, her hand on a jagged stone. "What?" "Over there." He pointed weakly into the gloom, where the wall curved into shadow. "A person. Watching us." Her pulse spiked, but she kept her face steady. "There's no one here, Jamie. Just us. You're tired, that's all." He shook his head, insistent. "I saw him. Tall. Thin. No eyes." A chill slithered down her spine. She turned, squinting into the darkness, but saw nothing, just the endless black of their tomb. "It's your imagination," she said, though her own mind conjured the image. Gaunt, eyeless, waiting. She shook it off, gripping the locket. "Help me with this rock. We're almost through." Jamie didn't argue, though his hands shook as he pushed at the debris. Together, they worked, stone by stone, until a faint draft kissed their faces, a breath of fresher air, tinged with damp and rust. Clara's heart leapt. "There," she said, shoving harder. "That's it." The pile shifted, revealing a narrow gap, just wide enough to crawl through. Beyond, the tunnel stretched upward, its walls rough-hewn and glistening with moisture. Clara helped Jamie forward, his weight heavy against her, and they squeezed into the passage. The air was cooler here, but the whispers came back, soft at first, then louder, a chorus of murmurs she couldn't place. "Jamie, Clara, stay." She clenched her jaw, ignoring it. "Keep moving," she told him, her voice a lifeline in the dark. "We're almost there." But the tunnel wasn't empty. As they crawled, the locket grew colder against her chest, and Jamie's grip tightened on her hand. "He's behind us," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The man with no eyes." Clara didn't look back. She couldn't. She pulled Jamie onward, her mind screaming that it was nothing, that they were alone. But the whispers followed, and the dark seemed to thicken, as if something, or someone, was closing in. Above, the cemetery lay quiet, the coffin sealed beneath its blanket of earth. The tremor had stopped, unnoticed by the grieving town. But deep below, the ground remembered, and the story was far from over. Night fell over Hollowell, the fog thickening until the town seemed to float in a gray limbo. The cemetery was deserted, the last mourners long gone, leaving only the wind to stir the wilted lilies on Clara and Jamie's grave. Old man Grayson, the caretaker, shuffled through the rows with his lantern, his breath puffing white in the cold. He'd worked the grounds for 40 years, seen every kind of sorrow, but something about that empty coffin gnawed at him. It wasn't right, burying nothing, no closure, no peace. He paused by the fresh mound, the dirt still loose, the flowers sagging. His lantern cast a feeble glow, shadows dancing across the headstone. Clara Henshaw and Jamie Henshaw, taken too soon. Grayson muttered a prayer, then froze. A sound, faint, scratchy, like nails on wood, came from below. He held his breath, ears straining. There it was again, sharper, insistent. Scratching. From the coffin. His heart stuttered. He swung the lantern closer, the light trembling in his grip. The ground quivered, a subtle shake that sent pebbles skittering. Then the dirt moved, bulging upward, as if something pushed from beneath. Grayson stumbled back, the lantern clattering to the grass. The scratching turned to a thud, rhythmic and urgent, and the coffin, he swore it, shifted, a groan of wood echoing through the stillness. "Lord have mercy," he rasped, crossing himself. He turned and ran, his bad leg dragging, his mind a tangle of fear and disbelief. By the time he reached the town square, his shouts woke half of Hollowell. "It's moving," he yelled, his voice cracking. "The coffin's moving. They ain't dead." Below, Clara didn't hear the chaos above. She didn't know the town was stirring, that her grave was becoming a horror story. All she knew was the icy water lapping at her knees, the tunnel walls slick with moss and despair. She and Jamie had crawled into the shaft marked on the map, hope surging as the air grew fresher, until the passage dipped and flooded, a black pool blocking their path. The water was frigid, fed by some underground spring, and it stretched into the dark, its surface rippling with their every move. "Mom, it's too cold," Jamie said, his teeth chattering. He clung to her arm, his injured leg trailing uselessly. "We can't swim that." "We have to," Clara said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. She clutched the metal box, map and locket inside, tucking it into her coat. "The shaft's on the other side. It's our way out. I'll carry you." Jamie's eyes widened, glassy with fever and fear. "What if we drown?" "We won't." She cupped his face, her hands steady despite the blood and grime. "I've got you. Always." He nodded, trusting her because he had no choice. Clara waded in, the water biting her skin, rising to her waist, then her chest. She hoisted Jamie onto her shoulders, his arms around her neck, his weight dragging her down. The cold was a living thing, clawing at her lungs, but she pushed forward, one step, then another, the tunnel narrowing around them. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices overlapping, pleading, screaming. "Stay, stay with us." Clara gritted her teeth, her broken arm throbbing as she braced against the wall. "Shut up," she muttered, her breath fogging the air. Jamie whimpered, his grip tightening. "He's here," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the slosh of water. The man with no eyes. Clara didn't look. She couldn't. The water was up to her chin now, Jamie's weight pulling her under. She kicked harder, her legs burning, her vision blurring. The tunnel sloped upward. She could feel it, but the current fought her, a relentless hand dragging her back. Her foot slipped, and she went under, water flooding her mouth, her nose. Jamie's scream was muffled, bubbles bursting around them. She clawed upward, breaking the surface with a gasp, Jamie coughing against her neck. "Hold on," she choked, her voice raw. The whispers swelled, a howl of anguish, and she felt it, a presence, heavy and close, brushing her skin like a shadow made flesh. She didn't turn. She swam, her body screaming, her love for Jamie the only fuel she had left. Ahead, the water shallowed, the tunnel widening into a ledge. Clara hauled herself up, dragging Jamie with her, collapsing onto the damp stone. He coughed, shivering violently, but alive. She pulled him close, her chest heaving, her eyes scanning the dark. The shaft was there, a rusted ladder climbing into shadow, the map's promise within reach. "We made it," she said, her voice breaking with relief. "We're getting out." Jamie didn't answer. His gaze was fixed behind her, wide and unblinking. "He's still there," he whispered. Clara turned, her heart hammering. The water rippled, though they hadn't moved. Something stirred beneath, a shape, vague and tall, rising slowly. No eyes, just hollow sockets, a mouth stretched in a silent scream. The whispers roared, "Stay," and the air grew colder, the locket burning against her chest. "Climb," she snapped, shoving Jamie toward the ladder. He obeyed, his hands slipping on the rungs, his injured leg slowing him. Clara followed, her broken arm useless, her good hand gripping the metal. The presence loomed closer, the water splashing as if something waded through it. She didn't look down. She climbed, her breath ragged, Jamie's sobs echoing above. Above ground, Grayson's tale spread like wildfire. The townsfolk gathered, some with shovels, some with crosses, their voices a mix of fear and hope. "Dig it up," someone shouted. "It's a sign," others cried. The coffin waited, trembling in its grave, as the first spade struck the earth. Below, Clara climbed, the dark closing in, the whispers chasing her heels. The ladder trembled beneath Clara's hands, rusted metal flaking off with every step. Her broken arm hung useless, a dead weight screaming with pain, but she climbed, driven by the shallow gasps of Jamie above her. The shaft stretched upward, a narrow throat of stone and shadow, the air growing colder the higher they went. Behind them, the water sloshed, unnatural, rhythmic, as if something followed. The whispers had fused into a low, keening wail, a sound that burrowed into her skull and gnawed at her sanity. "Keep going, Jamie," she rasped, her voice hoarse from shouting, from swallowing water. "We're almost there." He didn't answer, but his sneakers scraped the rungs, a faint reassurance he was still moving. Clara's good hand slipped, slick with sweat and blood, and she caught herself, her chest slamming against the ladder. She risked a glance down. Darkness, rippling water, and a shape, tall and gaunt, rising from the flood. No eyes, just pits, its head tilted as if listening. Her stomach lurched, and she tore her gaze away, climbing faster. The ladder ended abruptly, dumping them into a chamber, a hollowed-out pocket in the quarry's heart. Clara stumbled as she pulled herself up, dragging Jamie with her. He collapsed beside her, his breathing shallow, his face pale beneath the dirt and blood. The chamber was wide, its walls etched with crude carvings, spirals, skulls, hands reaching upward. Bones littered the floor, brittle and yellowed, some snapped. Clara scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. "Jamie, get up. We've got to move." He groaned, clutching his leg, but nodded, forcing himself upright. Clara scanned the room, her eyes darting to the metal box still tucked in her coat. She yanked it free, fumbling with the latch. It sprang open, spilling the map, now sodden and torn, and the locket onto the stone. The locket glinted, its surface pulsing with a faint, sickly light. She snatched it up, her fingers trembling, and pried it open. Inside was a faded photograph, a man in a miner's helmet, his face grim, and a scrawled note tucked beneath. She unfolded it, the paper crumbling at the edges. The words were shaky, ink smeared with age. "To whoever finds this, beware the curse. Buried with the locket, you join us. 3 nights to escape, or the dead claim you. I failed. Don't." Below, a name, Elias Crane, 1897. Clara's blood ran cold. 3 nights. She didn't know how long they'd been trapped, hours, a day, but the weight of the words sank into her. The whispers, the eyeless man, the moving coffin. It wasn't madness. It was real. "Mom." Jamie's voice quavered, pulling her back. He was staring across the chamber, his eyes wide with terror. She followed his gaze. The eyeless figure stood there, fully formed now. Tall, skeletal, its flesh gray and rotting, its mouth gaping in a silent howl. The air thickened, the carvings on the walls glowing faintly, pulsing in time with the locket's light. The bones rattled, shifting as if stirred by an unseen wind. "Stay behind me," Clara snapped, shoving Jamie back. She stepped forward, the locket clenched in her fist, her voice rising over the growing wail. "Leave us alone." The figure drifted closer, its hollow sockets fixed on her. The whispers sharpened. "Stay. Join us, Dot." And the chamber trembled, dust raining from the ceiling. Jamie sobbed, clinging to her coat, and Clara's heart fractured. She'd promised to protect him. She'd promised. "Take me," she shouted, her voice raw, cracking with desperation. "Not him. Take me instead." The figure paused, its head tilting, as if considering. The air stilled, the wail fading to a murmur. Clara's breath hitched, her chest tight with fear and resolve. She'd give anything, everything, for Jamie. The locket burned in her hand, searing her skin, but she held it out, an offering. For a moment, nothing. Then the figure retreated, melting into the shadows, the glow in the walls dimming. Clara exhaled, her knees buckling, but before she could collapse, the ground shuddered violently. Cracks split the ceiling, rocks tumbling. the chamber groaning as if the earth itself rejected them. "Mom!" Jamie yelled, pulling her arm. She snapped upright, adrenaline surging. "Run!" She grabbed the box, shoving the map and note inside, and pushed Jamie toward the only exit, a narrow tunnel branching from the chamber. The locket dangled from her neck, its heat fading, but the weight of the curse lingered, a shadow on her soul. They stumbled into the passage, the walls closing in, the air thick with dust. Behind them, the chamber collapsed, a roar of stone and bone, sealing the horror, or so she hoped. Jamie tripped, his injured leg buckling, and Clara hauled him up, half carrying him as they ran. The tunnel twisted, the ground uneven, but a faint draft brushed her face. Fresh air, distant but real. "We're close," she panted, her voice a lifeline for them both. "Hold on, Jamie. We're getting out." He nodded, tears streaking his face, his trust in her unshaken. The tunnel sloped upward, the air cooler, cleaner. Clara's lungs burned, her broken arm a fire of pain, but she pushed on, Jamie's weight a tether to her will. Behind them, the earth settled, the chamber's collapse a muffled thunder. The whispers were gone, the presence lifted, for now. But the note's warning echoed. 3 nights. Time was slipping, and the dead were patient. Above, Hollowell buzzed with Grayson's tale. Lanterns bobbed in the fog, shovels poised over the grave. The coffin still trembled, a mystery clawing its way free. Below, Clara ran, her son in her arms, the curse a shadow at her heels. Hollowell's streets buzzed with panic, the fog glowing faintly with the flicker of lanterns and torches. Grayson's breathless tale had ignited the town like dry tinder, his words, "The coffin's moving," spreading from doorstep to doorstep. By midnight, a crowd had gathered at the cemetery gates, their voices a tangle of disbelief, terror, and wild hope. Shovels gleamed in the mist, clutched by hands that trembled with purpose or dread. Margaret Henshaw pushed through, her coat flapping, her face set with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years. She'd heard Grayson's rant at the tavern. Half the town dismissed him as a drunk, but she'd seen the tremor at the funeral, felt the wrongness of that empty grave. Clara was her sister, stubborn and fierce, and Jamie was her nephew, a quiet boy who'd once called her Annie Maggs. They weren't gone. She wouldn't let them be. "We dig," she barked, seizing a shovel from a hesitant farmer. Now, some followed, Grayson, still pale and muttering prayers. The sheriff, reluctant but swayed by the crowd. A handful of neighbors driven by guilt or curiosity. Others hung back, clutching crosses or whispering about curses. "It's the quarry's dead," old widow Tate hissed, her eyes wild. "They've come for Clara and the boy. Digging'll only wake 'em more." "Shut it," Margaret snapped, driving her shovel into the dirt. The first clod fell, and the coffin's trembling grew, a low, steady thud that silenced the doubters. The crowd surged forward, spades striking earth, their breaths clouding the air. The grave opened like a wound, revealing the pine box, its lid scratched and splintered from within. The sheriff pried it open, the hinges squealing. Empty, except for claw marks gouged into the wood, deep and frantic. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "They're alive," someone shouted. "It's a haunting," cried another. Fists clenched, voices rose, and the town split, half clamoring to search the quarry, half recoiling in fear of vengeful spirits. Margaret stood over the coffin, her shovel shaking, her mind fixed on Clara's face. "We're coming," she whispered, a vow to the dark. Below, Clara didn't know the town was fracturing. She didn't hear the shovels or the shouts. All she knew was the tunnel's jagged walls, the weight of Jamie against her, and the relentless pursuit at their heels. The chamber's collapse had bought them moments, but the air was alive again, thick with whispers, cold with intent. The eyeless miner was back, a shadow in her peripheral vision, its presence a pressure on her spine. "Mom, I can't," Jamie gasped, his voice breaking. His leg dragged, the bandage soaked with blood, his fever burning through his skin. Clara's arm ached, her broken bones grinding with every step, but she hoisted him higher, half carrying him through the narrowing passage. "You can," she said, her tone fierce, unyielding. "We're so close, Jamie. I feel the air. It's fresh. We're almost out." The tunnel sloped steeper, the ground slick with damp. The draft grew stronger, a promise of freedom, but the whispers swelled. Stay. Stay with us, Dot. And the miner's shape sharpened, its skeletal fingers brushing the walls. Clara's heart hammered, her breath ragged. She couldn't fight it, not with her hands full of Jamie, not with her body failing. Leave him, she panted, her voice a plea and a command. You took your deal. I'm yours, just let him go. The figure paused, its hollow sockets glinting in the faint light from the locket. For a moment, she thought it worked. Then the tunnel shook, a low rumble that sent pebbles skittering. Jamie cried out, clinging to her, and Clara's resolve hardened. No, she growled, pushing forward. You don't get him. You don't get either of us. The passage tightened, forcing her to crawl, Jamie dragging behind. Her broken arm scraped the stone, a white-hot agony that blurred her vision, but she moved, inch by inch, the miner's wail echoing in her ears. The air grew cleaner, the tunnel widening, and she saw it. A sliver of gray light ahead, the surface breaking through. Go, she urged Jamie, shoving him toward it. Crawl to the light. He hesitated, his eyes pleading. Not without you. I'm right behind you, she lied, her voice soft, breaking. Go. He obeyed, inching forward, his sobs muffled by the stone. Clara followed, her strength fading, the miner's presence a cold hand on her neck. She glanced back. Its eyeless face loomed inches away, its mouth stretched in a silent scream, its fingers reaching. The locket flared, burning her chest, and she tore it free, hurling it at the figure. Take it, she shouted, her voice raw. The locket clattered against the stone, and the miner lunged for it, its wail peaking into a shriek, then silence. The air lightened, the pressure lifting, but the tunnel groaned, cracks spidering along the walls. Clara scrambled after Jamie, her body screaming, her mind fixed on his silhouette against the light. He reached the end, a jagged hole opening to the quarry's edge, and pulled himself out, collapsing in the fog. Clara was steps behind when the tunnel buckled, rocks tumbling, the passage sealing shut. She threw herself forward, her fingers clawing dirt, and broke free, rolling onto the damp earth beside him. They lay there, gasping, the fog cloaking them like a shroud. Jamie sobbed, curling into her, and Clara held him, her tears mixing with his. We're out, she whispered, her voice trembling with relief, exhaustion, love. We made it. Above, the town's chaos peaked. Shouts, prayers, the clatter of shovels. Below, the quarry sighed, its secrets buried again. But the night wasn't over, and the curse's clock still ticked. The fog swallowed Clara and Jamie, a cold, wet blanket that muffled their ragged breaths. They lay on the quarry's edge, free of the tunnel's jaws, but not its shadow. Clara's body was a map of pain, her broken arm a throbbing ruin, her legs numb from the climb, her lungs raw from dust and water. Jamie curled against her, his fever-hot skin pressed to her side, his injured leg limp and swollen. The air was fresh, sharp with the scent of rain, but freedom felt like a cruel tease. They were out, but not safe. Mom, Jamie whispered, his voice a threadbare plea. I'm so tired. I know, baby, Clara said, brushing his damp hair back. Her throat burned, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. Just a little longer. We'll find help. Someone's coming. She didn't know if it was true, but she'd say anything to keep him fighting. The tunnel's collapse echoed in her ears, a dull roar that faded into silence. The locket was gone, buried with the miner, and the whispers had stopped, but the weight of the curse lingered, a chill in her bones. 3 nights, the note had warned. How long had it been? 1? 2? Time blurred in the dark, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. She forced herself up, wincing as her broken arm swung uselessly. Come on, she said, hauling Jamie to his feet. He swayed, leaning into her, his trust a knife in her chest. The quarry stretched around them, a maze of rubble and fog, the town a distant smudge of light. She picked a direction, any direction, and stumbled forward, half carrying him, her strength a flickering ember. The ground sloped downward, slick with mud, and her boots slipped. She caught herself, but Jamie's weight pulled her off balance, and they fell, tumbling into a shallow ditch. Pain exploded in her arm, a white-hot scream, she choked back. Jamie landed beside her, his cry sharp and broken. Jamie, she crawled to him, her hands shaking as she checked his leg. The bandage was soaked, blood seeping through, and his face was ashen, his eyes fluttering. "Stay with me," she begged, cupping his cheeks. "Look at me." He tried, his gaze unfocused. "Mom, I can't." "Yes, you can." Her voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. "You're strong. Stronger than me. We're so close." But they weren't. The ditch was a trap, its walls steep and crumbling, the fog hiding the sky. Clara's heart sank, her guilt a tidal wave. She'd let him here, let him explore the quarry, failed to protect him. Now he was fading, and she was powerless, her promises empty, her love not enough. A sound broke the silence, a low gurgle, then a rush. Water surged from the earth, icy and black, flooding the ditch. Clara gasped, pulling Jamie up, but it rose fast, lapping at her knees, then her waist. "No, no, no," she shouted, clawing at the walls, her fingers sinking into mud. The current tugged, relentless, and she realized the tunnel's collapse had ruptured something, an underground stream unleashed. Jamie slipped from her grip, his head dipping under. "Jamie," she lunged, grabbing his coat, pulling him back. He coughed, limp in her arms, and the water roared, sweeping them down the ditch. Clara kicked, her broken arm useless, her good one locked around him. The flood carried them, a dark torrent through the quarry's veins, and she lost all sense of direction. Up, down, out, gone. Skeletal hands brushed her legs. Impossible, real, rising from the water. She screamed, kicking at them, their bony fingers grasping, pulling. The miner's curse, the dead of 1897, claiming what was theirs. The note's words burned in her mind. 3 nights, or the dead claim you. Time was up. "Leave him alone," she roared, her voice a primal thing, tearing through the dark. She thrashed, holding Jamie above the flood, her body a shield. The hands clawed at her, dragging her down, and she went under, water flooding her lungs. Jamie slipped again, and she clawed upward, breaking the surface with a gasp, her son still in her arms. The current slammed them against a rock, and Clara clung to it, her strength failing. Jamie's eyes were closed, his breathing faint, and she sobbed, pressing her forehead to his. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words a knife. "I'm so sorry." The hands returned, wrapping her legs, pulling. She kicked, weaker now, her vision dimming. The miner loomed in the water, a gaunt shadow, eyeless, relentless, its mouth stretched in triumph. Clara's heart broke, her fight draining away. She'd lost him. She'd lost everything. Then, a flicker. The locket, buried in the tunnel, but its curse tied to her, to Jamie. She remembered Elias Crane's note, the miner's pause when she'd offered herself. It wanted her, not him. "Take me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the flood. "Let him go." The hands tightened, the miner's wail piercing her skull. The water surged, splitting them apart. Jamie swept one way, Clara another. She screamed his name, her voice drowned by the torrent, her hands grasping air as he vanished into the dark. The miner's grip closed around her, pulling her under, and she sank, her last thought a prayer. "Live, Jamie. Please." Above, the town's chaos churned, shovels striking earth, voices clashing. Below, the quarry swallowed Clara, the curse claiming its due, or so it seemed. The fog over Hollowell glowed with torchlight, a chaotic dance of shadows as the townsfolk swarmed the quarry's edge. Margaret Henshaw led the charge, her shovel biting into the earth, her voice hoarse from shouting orders. The coffin's claw marks had lit a fire in her, a desperate, reckless belief that Clara and Jamie were alive, trapped, fighting. The sheriff followed, his deputies hauling picks and ropes, while Grayson muttered prayers, his lantern trembling in his gnarled hands. The crowd was a mess, half driven by hope, half by fear of the cursed widow Tate still wailed about. "Over here," a deputy yelled, his voice cutting through the clamor. He'd found a crevice near the quarry's northern rim, a jagged scar where the ground had shifted. Water trickled from it, black and cold, and a faint sound, muffled, human, drifted up. Margaret dropped her shovel, scrambling to the edge, her heart in her throat. "Jamie? Clara?" she called, her voice breaking. The sound came again, a weak cry, a boy's voice. "It's him," she shouted, turning to the others. "Dig?" Now, shovels struck stone, hands clawed at dirt. The townsfolk united in a frenzied rush. The crevice widened, revealing a shallow channel where the flood had carved its path. Margaret peered in, her breath catching as a shape emerged, small, limp, washed up against a rock. "Jamie, get him out," she barked, sliding into the muck herself. 2 men followed, splashing through the water, and together they hauled him up. Jamie's face was pale, his lips blue, his clothes soaked and torn. He coughed, a wet, ragged sound, and his eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive. "Mom," he mumbled, his voice a whisper. "Where's Mom?" Margaret's chest tightened, relief warring with dread. "We'll find her," she said, cradling him, her hands shaking. "You're safe now." She climbed out, Jamie in her arms, and the crowd surged around them. Gasps, prayers, a sob from Grayson. The sheriff wrapped a blanket around the boy, but Jamie pushed at it, his fevered gaze darting to the quarry. "She's still down there," he croaked, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "The water, it took her." Margaret froze, the words a punch to her gut. "What water?" she demanded, but Jamie's strength gave out, his head lolling against her shoulder. She clutched him tighter, her mind racing. The flood, the curse. He'd seen something, survived something. Clara was out there, lost but maybe alive. "Keep digging," she told the sheriff, her voice steel. "She's not gone yet." Below, Clara drifted in darkness, her body battered, her mind a haze of pain and loss. The flood had torn Jamie from her, the miner's hands dragging her down, and she'd fought until her lungs burned and her vision blacked out. Now she floated, weightless, in a pocket of air trapped beneath the quarry's veins. Water lapped at her chest, icy and relentless, but she clung to a jagged rock, her good hand locked around it, her broken arm a useless anchor. "Jamie," she whispered, her voice a ghost in the silence. She couldn't feel him, couldn't hear him, only the steady drip of water and the faint hum of the earth. The miner was gone, its grip loosened, but the curse's shadow lingered, a cold certainty that she'd paid its price. She'd offered herself, and it had taken her, sparing him. He was alive. She had to believe that, or she'd failed him completely. Her head throbbed, her breath shallow. The air was thin, stale, and her strength ebbed with every heartbeat. She'd lost him in the flood, watched him slip away, and the grief was a weight heavier than the stone around her. "I'm sorry," she murmured, tears slipping into the water. "I tried." A flicker caught her eye, a pinprick of light, high above, faint through the cracks in the rock. She blinked, her mind sluggish. A hallucination? A trick of the curse? But it pulsed, steady, real. Voices followed, distant, muffled, shouting her name. Clara's heart stuttered, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. "Help!" she croaked, her voice too weak to carry. She tried again, louder, "Help!" The effort drained her, her grip slipping on the rock, but the light grew, the voices clearer. She couldn't make out the words, but they were there, above her, searching. "Jamie," she breathed, clinging to the thought of him. If he was safe, if he'd made it, she could hold on. She shifted, her broken arm scraping the stone, pain jolting her awake. The water tugged at her, but she dug her fingers into the rock, her will a fragile thread. The light danced, closer now, and she screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore from her soul. "I'm here." Above, the townsfolk dug, their efforts frantic. Jamie stirred in Margaret's arms, his sobs quieting as he pointed weakly to the crevice. "She's there," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Don't stop." Margaret nodded, her jaw tight. "We won't," she promised, her eyes fixed on the dark. The sheriff called for more men, the hole widening, water gushing out. The light of their lanterns pierced the gloom, reaching for Clara, a lifeline she couldn't yet see. Below, Clara held on, the voices her anchor, the hope of Jamie her strength. The curse had taken its toll, but she wasn't done, not yet. The quarry trembled under Hollowell's frantic hands, the fog lit by a dozen lanterns swaying in the wind. Margaret Henshaw stood at the crevice's edge, her coat soaked with mud, her voice raw from shouting. Jamie huddled beside her, wrapped in a blanket, his fevered eyes fixed on the hole where the townsfolk dug. The sheriff's men hacked at the rock, their picks striking sparks, while water gushed from the breach, a black torrent that carried faint, desperate cries. "She's down there," Jamie said, his voice trembling but sure. I heard her. She's alive. Margaret gripped his shoulder, her heart pounding. We'll get her out, she vowed, her gaze locked on the dark. The crowd worked in a chaotic rhythm, shovels, hands, ropes, driven by the boy's words and the claw-marked coffin still haunting their minds. The earth resisted, stone crumbling only to reveal more, but the cries grew louder, a beacon in the chaos. Below, Clara clung to her rock, the icy water lapping at her chest. Her good hand bled, nails torn from gripping the stone, her broken arm a numb, useless weight. The pinprick of light above had swelled, a jagged window to salvation, and the voices, Margaret's, the sheriff's, others, called her name. She screamed back, her throat raw. I'm here, please. But the sound barely reached them, drowned by the flood and her fading strength. Her body was failing, her breath shallow gasps, her vision blurring at the edges. The air pocket shrank, the water rising, and she knew she couldn't hold on much longer. Jamie was safe. She felt it in her bones, a mother's instinct. But the curse wasn't done. The miner's presence lingered, a cold shadow in the water, waiting for her to slip. A ripple broke the surface, subtle at first, then violent. The eyeless figure rose, gaunt, gray, its skeletal hands clawing the air, its hollow sockets fixed on her, its mouth stretching in a silent wail, and the water churned, skeletal fingers brushing her legs again. Clara's heart seized, terror flooding her veins. No, she rasped, kicking weakly. You've had enough. The miner drifted closer, its wail piercing her skull. Stay. Mind that, the curse's final claim. The locket was gone, buried in the tunnel, but its power clung to her, a thread tying her to the dead. She'd offered herself for Jamie, and it meant to take her now, on the third night, as the note had warned. Above, a rock broke free, tumbling into the water with a splash. Light poured in, blinding, and Margaret's voice cut through. Clara, hold on. A rope dangled, swaying just out of reach, and the townsfolk's shouts swelled. A lifeline so close, yet too far. Clara lunged for it, her good hand slipping on the rock, and the miner struck. Its hands clamped her ankles, yanking her down. She screamed, water flooding her mouth, her fingers clawing air. The rope swung, inches away, and she kicked, her legs burning, the miner's grip iron tight. Let me go, she roared, her voice a primal thing, fueled by love, by fury, by Jamie. The miner pulled harder, its wail a chorus of the damned, and Clara's strength faltered. Her hand brushed the rope, then lost it, her body sinking. Images flashed, Jamie's smile, his sketches, his voice calling her Mom, and she roared again, a sound that shook the air. He's mine. You can't have me. She twisted, her good hand seizing the rock, her legs thrashing. The miner's face loomed, eyeless, relentless, but she glared into its void, her will of fire the curse couldn't quench. I'm not yours, she spat, her voice breaking through the wail. My love's stronger than your hate. The words hit like a blow. The miner flinched, its grip loosening, its wail fracturing into silence. The skeletal hands retreated, the water stilling, and Clara lunged, her fingers closing around the rope. She pulled, her body screaming, the townsfolk's shouts a lifeline pulling her up. The miner reached once more, a final, feeble grasp, but the light burned brighter, and it sank, dissolving into the flood. Pull, Margaret yelled above, and the rope tightened, dragging Clara from the water. She clung to it, her broken arm useless, her good one locked in a death grip. The townsfolk hauled, hands over hands, until she broke the surface, gasping, sobbing, alive. Margaret seized her, pulling her onto solid ground, and Clara collapsed, her chest heaving. Jamie, she croaked, her eyes searching, wild with need. Here, Margaret said, guiding her to him. Jamie threw off his blanket, crawling to her, and they collided, arms wrapping, tears mixing, a tangle of relief and love. Mom, he sobbed, burying his face in her shoulder. I thought you were gone. Never, Clara whispered, clutching him, her voice a vow. I'd never leave you. The townsfolk circled them, lanterns casting a warm glow, their shouts fading to murmurs. The sheriff knelt, checking Clara's pulse, while Grayson muttered a prayer of thanks. Margaret sank beside them, her hand on Clara's back, her own tears falling. "I'm sorry," she said, the words heavy with years of regret. "I should have been there." Clara met her eyes, exhaustion softening her edges. "You're here now." The quarry sighed, the flood slowing, the earth settling. The miner was gone, the curse broken, Clara's love a blade that cut its threads. The night held them, fog and all, but the dark had lost its claim. The fog began to lift as dawn crept over Hollowell, a soft gold piercing the gray shroud that had choked the town for days. The quarry's edge was a chaos of mud and triumph, the townsfolk's lanterns dimming in the growing light. Clara Henshaw lay on the damp earth, her arms locked around Jamie, their breaths sinking in a rhythm of survival. Her broken arm throbbed, her body ached with every bruise and cut, but she felt none of it. Only him, warm and alive against her, his sobs quieting into hiccups. "Mom," Jamie whispered, his voice muffled against her coat. "We're okay." "Yeah, baby," Clara said, her own tears falling freely now, cutting clean tracks through the grime on her face. "We're okay. We made it." Margaret knelt beside them, her hands hovering, unsure but desperate to help. Her gaunt face softened, years of bitterness melting in the glow of their reunion. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling, "I thought I'd lost you." Again, Clara looked up, meeting her sister's eyes. The old wounds, harsh words, a decade of silence, flared briefly, then faded. She reached out with her good hand, gripping Margaret's. "You didn't," she said, her tone rough but warm. "You found us." Margaret's sob broke free, and she pulled them both into her arms, a clumsy, tearful embrace. The townsfolk watched, a quiet circle of witnesses, Grayson with his lantern extinguished, the sheriff wiping mud from his hands, neighbors who doubted now staring in awe. The claw-marked coffin, the whispers of curses, the moving earth. It was real, and they defied it. The sheriff cleared his throat, his gruff voice cutting through. "We need to get you two to Doc Miller. That arm's a mess, Clara," and the boys half frozen. Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. Strong hands lifted her, Jamie still clinging, and the crowd parted, guiding them back to town. The quarry loomed behind, its jagged moss silent now, the flood stilled, the miner's curse buried with its bones. The air felt lighter, the fog retreating as if the earth itself exhaled relief. Doc Miller's clinic was a bustle of warmth and antiseptic, a stark contrast to the cold dark they'd escaped. Clara sat on a cot, her arms splinted and bandaged, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Jamie lay beside her, his leg cleaned and wrapped, and 4 dripping fluids into his arm. His fever was breaking, his color returning, and he gripped her hand, refusing to let go even as the doctor fussed. "You're a miracle, both of you," Doc Miller said, shaking his head. 3 days down there? I've never seen anything like it." "Love's a stubborn thing," Clara murmured, her eyes on Jamie. He smiled, faint but real, and her heart swelled, a quiet, fierce joy that drowned out the pain. Margaret hovered nearby, bringing cups of weak tea, her every move an apology. "I've got a spare room," she said, hesitant. "If you want it, just until you're back on your feet." Clara sipped the tea, the warmth seeping into her bones. "We'd like that," she said, and Margaret's face lit up, a crack in her guarded shell. Jamie perked up too, his voice soft but eager. "Can we get a dog, Aunt Mags?" Margaret laughed, a sound Clara hadn't heard in years. "We'll see, kid. Let's get you walking first." The days that followed blurred into recovery, slow, steady, stitched with small victories. The town rallied, their fear replaced by a strange pride. They brought casseroles, patched Clara's coat, fixed the broken windows of Margaret's house. Widow Tate stopped muttering about curses, instead knitting Jamie a lopsided scarf. Grayson told the story at the tavern, his voice hushed with reverence, and Hollowell listened, their whispers turning to wonder. The quarry was sealed, a crew pouring concrete over its scars, burying its secrets for good. Clara watched from a distance one morning, Jamie at her side, his crutches sinking into the soft earth. "It's over," she said, more to herself than him. "Yeah," he replied, leaning into her. "But we're not." She smiled, ruffling his hair. "No, we're not." Weeks later, spring crept in, tentative but sure. Clara's arm healed, the cast traded for a sling, her strength returning with every day. Jamie hobbled less, his sketches filling Margaret's walls, tunnels and miners fading, replaced by rivers, porches, dogs. Margaret stayed, her spare room becoming theirs, her quiet presence a bridge rebuilt. One afternoon, they sat on that porch, a rickety thing Margaret had fixed up, watching a mutt with floppy ears chase its tail in the yard. Jamie had named him Rusty, a nod to the quarry's metal box, and his laughter rang out, bright and free. Clara sipped coffee, Margaret beside her, the silence between them comfortable now. "I was wrong," Margaret said suddenly, her eyes on the horizon. "About a lot. I should have fought for you, not against you." Clara set her mug down, her hand finding Margaret's. "We've got time now. That's what matters." Jamie ran up, Rusty bounding behind, and flopped onto the steps. "Can we stay here, Mom? For good?" Clara looked at him, then at Margaret, the house, the dog, the life they'd clawed their way back to. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady sure. "For good." The sun dipped low, painting the sky gold, and Hollowell hummed with its quiet routines. The coffin rested in the cemetery, still but at peace, its story a legend now. Clara and Jamie had faced the dark, together, and emerged scarred but whole, their bond a light no curse could dim. They'd never take a day for granted again. The sun dipped low, painting the sky gold, and Hollowell hummed with its quiet routines. The coffin rested in the cemetery, still but at peace, its story a legend now. Clara and Jamie had faced the dark, together, and emerged scarred but whole, their bond a light no curse could dim. They'd never take a day for granted again. And that's the end of A Mother and Son Are Buried Together. Then the coffin starts moving. Thank you, amazing readers, for joining me on this wild, emotional ride through Hollowell's fog and shadows. I hope Clara and Jamie's journey, full of horror, heartache, and hard-won hope, kept you on the edge of your seat and warmed your heart by the end. Your support means everything to me as I craft these tales. If you love this story, please drop a like below. It's the best way to let me know you enjoyed it. And if you want more adventures, from eerie mysteries to uplifting triumphs, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a chapter. Share your thoughts in the comments. What was your favorite moment? I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep chasing the light in the dark. See you in the next story.